Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. Before the sun cleared the rim of the basin, the Hensley place rattled itself awake. Wind tugged at the tin roof. Windmill blades squeaked as they turned. And somewhere, a rooster late, as usual, announced at dawn that it had already begun. Sarah. Hensley had been up an hour, sleeves rolled and braid pinned tight beneath her hat. She'd fed the hens, skimmed cream from yesterday's milk, and hauled a sloshing bucket to the washpot, where it steamed like breath in the chill. She paused. On the porch, drawing a deep lungful of the morning, the dusty sweetness of alfalfa, the sour of manure, a clean peppery tongue of crushed sage. Far past the house, a ground fog lay low and silver over the dry creek bed, as if the sky had dropped a scarf on its way west. Pa would be out soon, cranky until his first coffee, squinting at the sky like it owed him something. He always said, a day that started hushed like this might be a good day for mending fence and a bad day for anything else. Sarah checked the pig pen last. Morning, Mudfoot, she called, and the hog lifted his square head from a nest of straw to honor her. With a grunt. Old Mudfoot was a heap of pink and bristle, with a notch missing from one ear and a way of talking that made him sound like a dishonest uncle. He had an athlete's understanding of limits and a thief's taste for opportunity. He'd gotten out twice last spring, once to uproot Ma Klein's melons and once to wallow in the stock trough until the water ran chocolate. And Sarah had developed a sixth sense for the hog's moods. This morning, his little black eyes were bright and scheming. Don't, she warned, as if a single word could steer a hog's soul. Mudfoot waffled his jowls, then pressed his snout against the lowest slat. The board had gone soft with the ground met wood, and for all Pa's insistence that it would hold one more season, Sarah knew better. She set down the feed pail, slid into the pen, and threw her weight against the fence. The pig looked at her. She looked at the pig. Somewhere between them, a pact existed she fed. He behaved, but it was the sort of pact that dissolved on cool mornings with mischief in the air. Sarah. Pa's voice carried from the yard, rough as gravel. You seen the awl? Can't. Stitch a saddle without. From inside the house, a cupboard door banged. Pa could find anything so long as it lived on the workbench. If it wandered to a shelf or got put neatly in a drawer, it was lost to eternity. Sarah twisted to shout back, try the flour bin. The board gave Dot. It didn't splinter so much as sigh apart, the way old things let go all at once. Mudfoot moved like water, his bulk pouring through, belly shaving the ground, shoulders wriggling with obscene grace. By the time Sarah landed on her knees, the hog was already clear, a pink torpedo cutting across the yard. Pa! She yelled, scrambling. Up. He's out. A chair scraped. Damn it, girl. Sarah snatched her hat, grabbed the lariat off the corral post, and vaulted the fence. Mudfoot lengthened his trot, aim true and ears pinned. He didn't veer toward the kitchen slops as usual, or pause at the wallow where the last monsoon had left a thin skin of cracked clay. He made straight for the east pasture, for the mesquite thickets beyond, legs pumping, hooves drumming a steady comical beat. Come on, Sarah muttered to herself and gave chase. Dust rose soft around her boots. Grasshoppers sprang and clacked. She cut across the kitchen garden, vaulting the row of beans and nearly tripping on the coil of hose Pa swore he never left out. A jackrabbit broke from under the fence rails and zigzagged into sage. In the distance, a hawk called, a high rusted hinge of a sound. Mudfoot squeezed under the back fence where Coyote had already tunneled, then arrowed down the slope toward the wash where Dry Creek ran when it remembered how. The Hensleys whirled folded out in layers as she ran, the split-rail corral, the two black horses ears up at the commotion, the windmill pecking the wind, the line of cottonwoods tracing a pale scar that had once been a river. Beyond that, land so flat you could watch a dust devil walk it from fence post to fence post like a man with time to kill. Sarah could feel her breath now, hot in her throat. She hitched the lariat tighter across her shoulder. Horseback would have been sensible, but a horse would spook the hog into a run, and Mudfoot's stubbornness beat horsepower if he figured the situation offended him. Better to keep him in sight than to chase him blind. She broke into the mesquite as Mudfoot did, thorns kissing at her skirt, sleeves rasping over dry bark. Mesquite didn't give ground easy. It snagged and held. She lifted her arms and moved. Sideways, the way you do when you're trying to slip through a quarrel. Twice she freed her em from a thorn, with a whispered curse that would have earned her a look from Ma, if Ma had still been around to give it. The thought came and went. Like a swallow, living made you busy. Grief waited its turn. The shade under the mesquite was cooler. Near her knee, a horned lizard froze, perfect as a scraped-up rock, until it flickered its tiny pink tongue. Mudfoot, undaunted, bustling and wheezing, plunged ahead as if some rope tugged him by the nose. He wasn't baying or fretting like he did when he chased a scent for mischief. He was intent. Sarah had learned to listen to animals. Pa said times were lean, because rain was stingy and the bank wasn't, and animals, being closer to the ground, felt lean times first. When a horse took to picking at fence posts, minerals were wrong in the soil. When the chickens went quiet in the middle of the day, a hawk was around. When a hog set off with purpose, it meant food or trouble was buried where honest men didn't. Look, she ducked beneath a bowed limb, came up with leaves in her hair, and almost stepped on a rattlesnake stretched across a patch of bare earth like a fallen whip. She froze. The snake lifted its head, black eyes reflecting a thin slice of the morning. The rattle stayed quiet. They watched one another for a count of 5. Then the snake slid forward, silk on dust, and disappeared under a mat of dead cholla. You, Sarah whispered to whatever saint-minded foolish girls and focused hogs. She hurried on. The wash opened in front of her, its bed a chalky trough, braided with old hoofprints and the wind's handwriting. Cottonwoods stood like sentries, leaves trembling even when the air was still. You could read a year in that creek if you knew how. Where the banks were cut and recent, the last flood had run high. Where debris hung 6 feet up in branches, some spring long past had carried whole trees down like driftwood. Folks said there had been fish once. Folks said a lot of things about before. Mudfoot slid down the bank with cheerful chaos and hit the bottom so hard his belly slapped dust. He righted himself, snorted, and began to root. Not along the edges where water used. To run, not near the tangle of drifted sticks, but in the middle, where the sand was powder and the sun already warmed it. What are you after? Sarah asked, hands on her knees as her lungs tried to find a slow way to breathe. Mudfoot answered with enthusiasm, snout down, nostrils flaring, grunts deepening until they were almost a purr. Sand flew behind him in curtains. He'd dig, pause, angle his head, dig again. It reminded Sarah of the way Pa worked with the auger when he thought he'd found a pocket of water, coaxing the earth to admit a secret. She stepped into the wash. The dust was soft as flour and stole into her boots. A line of tracks crossed from west to east, older prints drooping at the edges where wind had licked them. Horse. Another set, human, leading and following. She crouched. The heel wore down. On the outside edge, the nail heads in one boot left tiny crescents. She could tell they weren't fresh. The sharpness had gone out of them, and a juniper berry had rolled into one print and settled without leaving a dent. Still, someone had been here more recently than the last storm, and storms hadn't bothered Dry Creek since the spring. She glanced up, a habit of caution she had learned after stepping into a shadow once and finding a coyote not 5 yards away, mange ragging its hide, stubborn as any sinner. Nothing moved but leaves and the long drift of sunlight. Mudfoot grunted. Deeper now, a triumphant bass. Sarah heard the scrape of something harder than sand. She took a step closer. The hog's shoulders worked, whole body thrown into the task. Sand shot at her shins and pattered down her socks. Easy, she murmured, more to steady herself than the pig. She tried to think like him. What did a hog smell under 2 feet of sand in a dry wash? Root? Carrion? A dead steer would announce itself in a different key. Shelled corn would call him like a hymn, but nothing grew in the creek bed. Once, Mudfoot had uncovered a nest of quail eggs and eaten until he slept in the wreckage, lips yolked yellow. This didn't feel like eggs. Footsteps scuffed the bank. Behind her soft, quick. Sarah spun so fast she almost lost her footing. A pair of quail skittered from the brush, topknots bobbing. The male flared his wings and made a noise like rolled marbles. She let out the breath she hadn't admitted she was holding and allowed herself half a laugh at her own nerves. She looked back at the hog. He had his snout jammed deep, shoulders heaving. The hole now had neat sides, as if some careful hand had once cut a square, and time had left it to fill itself in. That thought arrived uninvited and sat down with a weight that made her mouth go dry. "Mudfoot," she said, voice low. "Back up." He didn't. If anything, he redoubled his effort. The scrape sounded again metal on grit. He shook his head and brought up a mouthful of sand, sneezed, then shoved in again. Sarah reached for his ear, meaning to tug him away before he cut himself. But as she leaned in, the sun slid across the rim and struck the hole just so. Something down there winked, not a pale rock or a shard of glass. It was a colder light, a tidy glint the color of old coins and new knives. Sarah's hand hung in the air. The wash felt suddenly larger and emptier, the silence a blanket pulled tight. She glanced up the bank, across the flats, back toward the mesquite. The world went on wind in leaves. A hawk on a rising thermal, the twin lines of their fence like stitches on the land. You could live your whole life here and never see more than dirt, sky, and work. You could run the same path 100 mornings and never find anything but your own breath for company. And yet, easy, she told herself again, and the word shivered. She knelt. With the flat of her palm, she smoothed the sand at the edge of the hole. The shape underneath wasn't round like a pot or irregular like a boulder. It had a corner, a right angle, as neat as a carpenter's square. Mudfoot snorted, and as if satisfied he'd made his point, stepped aside. He huffed at her, bored now that the digging part of the miracle was done, and began to nose at a clump of salt grass like none of this was his fault. Sarah swallowed. She reached into the hole and brushed the surface with her fingers. Grit rasped under her nails, warm and unforgiving. Her fingertips found metal cool beneath the warm skin of sand, then slid along an edge to a seam. She sat back on her heels, heart lifting and dropping all at once, like a wagon wheel hitting a rut. Somewhere far behind her, the windmill squeaked. From the yard, faint as a memory, Pa called her name. Sarah didn't answer. She was looking at the glint of metal winking up from the earth, and for the first time all morning, the day didn't feel like a day at all. It felt like a door. Sarah scraped away the last fist of sand and cleared the top clean with her palm. She expected a rock with a vein of mica, maybe a buried frying pan dropped by some drunken cowhand decades back. What she'd uncovered had weight and angles that didn't belong to nature. A lid with a lip, iron gone red with rust, a seam that met true at a corner. She levered her fingers under the edge and lifted. The lid didn't move. The hole was tight, and the box had settled over years until the sand fit it like a glove. Sarah rolled her shoulders, dug the heels of her boots deeper for purchase, and worked the sand wider, scooping and tossing until the box had air on all four sides. Sweat stung her eyes. Mudfoot stood off to the left, watching her with a drowsy interest, as if satisfied that his part was done and the rest was human foolishness. Help would be appreciated, she told him. And the hog sneezed in reply. She gripped and pulled. The iron groaned against grit, rose an inch, then another. The bottom clung like a reluctant tooth, and then let go all at once. Sarah rocked back with it and found herself sitting in the dust, arms around a box the size of a bread pan, and twice as heavy. The lock was broken split neat through at the hasp, not corroded but sheared, as if by a single rude blow. She ran her thumb along the metal and found a jagged bite the shape of force, not time. The lid had a little give to it now, like a secret eager for company. She set the box between her boots, lifted the lid, and the morning tilted. Bundles of banknotes lay inside in careful stacks, some gone to lace at the edges, others crisp as the day they were printed. A faint, sickly sweet smell of old paper and machine oil rose, the scent of a place she'd only ever put in her mine vaults and counting rooms, windows barred against dust. Tucked between the stacks was a short coil of fuse, powder black and dry, and a handful of brass cartridges that had once been polished bright. Under those, she saw a flash of nickel and reached and got her fingers closed on a badge dot. It was the six-pointed star of a sheriff, the words Dry Creek County stamped around. The center and the name Alden hand-engraved below, letters shallow but sure. The badge was bent across its middle as if someone had stepped on it, and a reddish stain puckered near one tip, old and thin but unmistakable. Blood darkens to the color of tobacco given years enough. She didn't need to ask whose dot Sarah held. The star at the height of her breath. Sheriff Alden had been the story men told when whiskey was low and the night went soft with memory, how he'd ridden out after the Blackthorn gang the afternoon they blew the banks safe and took half the town's savings with them. He'd kissed his wife on the brow, told his deputies to wait for his signal, and followed the outlaws toward the river by himself, promising to send a shot to bring the others when he'd found their camp. No shot had ever come. They'd found his horse 3 days later, with a saddle twisted under its belly and a bullet crease on its ear. They'd never found the man. Sarah turned the star over and felt the weight of it. Mudfoot huffed and rooted at the sand, as if embarrassed to be present at something meant for better company. Saints, she whispered, though saints felt like the province of other people's kitchens, where icons watched over boiling pots. In the Hensley house, the wall held a cracked mirror and a photograph of Ma. Those had to do. She set the badge at the edge of the hall, as gently as if it might bruise, and peered deeper into the strongbox. Beneath the top layer of money lay a folded paper tied with twine. She slid it free and loosened the knot. A ledger page greeted her in neat, careful hand tallies in columns, names, amounts. She recognized old ones: Klein, Rivera, Pomeroy, dabbed in ink like fly bodies. A second sheet, folded again, held a pencil map, no names, but landmarks drawn in the rough. The windmill sketched like a daisy, the cottonwood line, a curve for Dry Creek, 3 X marks downstream, and a 4th farther east with a note, Spares 2, scrawled beside it. Her skin prickled, and not from the shade cooling as the sun moved. She could have sat there and read it twice more, wrung a sense out of it with time. But time had begun to feel like a thing you could spend all at once without meaning to. An old track bit into the bank 30 yards down, and now that she was listening with more than ears, she could swear the land held its breath the way a room does when someone stands outside your door, deciding whether to knock. She put the papers back, shut the box, and slid the badge beneath the twine like a promise. Then she stood and tried the weight of the iron in her hands. It was heavier with... The lid closed, as if secrets gained pounds. Carrying it out of the wash took both arms, and her jaw clenched. She climbed the bank sideways, like a crab, found purchase, and heaved. At the lip she paused, breath shuddering, and looked back down into the neat square she and the hog had made. The hole remained, an empty mouth where the day had turned. Mudfoot came up on his own route, unbothered, and paused to examine a beetle with professional interest. "You," she said to him, "are going to get sainted for this," and hoisted the box again. She cut back through the mesquite, choosing a different path, one that held more shade and less thorn. Twice she stopped and listened. Once a branch clicked against another far off, a sound not unlike the bump of wood when two men whisper and shift, and one forgets himself enough to lean where he shouldn't. But the wind was 1,000 fingers, and she wouldn't loan it a shape unless it deserved one dot at the fence above the pasture. She set the box in the weeds and caught her breath. From there she could see the house, small and square, smoke wandering from the stovepipe now that Pa had got his coffee to behave. The windmill flashed at her in trousered twirls. One of the horses, the black mare, Annabelle had come to the rail to stare, ears pricked forward. Everything that was hers was still where she'd left it. That was a blessing you didn't name. Too loud. She slid through the rails, fetched the pig back with a cluck of the tongue, and shouldered the box once more. It felt like a baby you hadn't asked for, and meant to keep safe anyway, dot in the yard. She went straight past the porch, where Pa had laid out his all, his saddle, his coffee cup, and half a biscuit that was already recruiting flies. "You've been gone an age," he said, not looking up. "Hog get himself reformed?" "Mostly," she said, and kept moving. Pa heard the note in her voice. He lifted his head, eyes narrowing at the line of her shoulders, the thing she wasn't saying. His gaze snagged on the iron corners bumping against her skirt. He set down the awl. "What's that?" "A trouble," she said, and immediately wished she'd picked another word. He rose and met her in the shadow of the barn, as if some part of him knew that whatever this was, it wasn't meant for daylight or the kitchen where Ma's photograph could watch. Inside, the air was hay-sweet and cool. Swallows had made a new mud cup on the beam and scolded them from it. Sarah kicked a path through chaff and set the box on the hay wagon's tongue. Pa ran his thumb along the broken hasp. "Found this where?" "In the wash." Mudfoot dug to it. She told it plain: the hole, the iron, the weight of paper, the badge engraved Alden. When she said the name, the lines at the corners of Pa's eyes deepened, not from frowning, but because the map of his face had to make room for something older. He stood with one hand braced on the wagon, looking at the box as if it were a person he might decide about. "And inside you found?" She lifted the lid and showed him. The money's green and sepia made the dim barn light look like old pond water. Pa didn't reach for it. He reached for the badge. He turned it in his palm and blinked slow, as a man does when he's letting two versions of the past decide who gets the chair. "Lord above," he said, not loudly, and set the star down as if it were hot. That'd be the same summer the bank got took. I was hauling salt from Yuma then. Came back to town 2 days after, and folks had their pockets inside out. The blackthorns, he broke off. The rolls of his shoulders changed, went from farm man to a shape with weight in its hands. Sarah had seen it twice before, once when he'd put down a steer foaming at the mouth, and once when a snake had coiled under the step with their baby. Cousin toddled. It was a knowing that said, "Do the right thing fast, and don't mind your heart until after dot." She knew the story the way everyone did. The Blackthorn gang weren't from anywhere anyone would claim, though men liked to say they'd come up out of Mexico with a storm one year and gone back the same way. They had a reputation for laughing while they worked and for never shooting a kid or a preacher, which told you less about mercy than it did about vanity. Their leader, Fletcher Blackthorne, had been a man who didn't waste words and had a face. You couldn't remember right 2 minutes after he'd left. All anyone seemed confident of was his hat, silver concos around the band, and a wrinkle in the crown like a dimple. It was the sort of detail that made a better story than a useful lead. "I reckon this is their take," Sarah said. "Or part of it." "Reckon so," Pa said. He looked at the stacks the way a man looks at hail on the horizon, counting damage before it falls. Sarah waited for him to say what to do. She could. Tell him she already knew carry it to town, set it on the sheriff's desk, speak the truth plain. But the badge had changed the air between them. She had never known Sheriff Alden, only the sound of his name in other people's mouths. Way grief flattened it. Pa had known the man maybe not well, but enough to say his name softer. It wasn't just money in the box. It was a body that hadn't come home. Pa wiped his hands on his pants and peered into the gap along the inside rim where hinges showed. "Locks blown, not rusted," he said. "See how clean that crack runs?" They popped it with a cap. Couldn't. Get the lid off clean, tossed it, meant to come back to sort it out. He touched the coil of fuse with one knuckle. Something spooked him. Maybe the flood cut loose. Maybe a rider they didn't like. Either way, they buried the problem and rode. He glanced at the open doors, the yard beyond, the long bright morning going about its ordinary duties. If they buried it, they might. Still wanted, he said, and in the saying, the yard didn't look like their yard anymore. It looked like a stage a play had already begun upon. "We should take it to the sheriff," Sarah said, hearing her own voice steady and grateful for it. "Before anybody else comes looking?" Ha nodded slowly. "We will." He put the lid down and pressed until the iron kissed iron. The sound was small and hard, like decisions, but not slung over your shoulder in broad day, not with the road like a straight answer, and the house sitting here with its mouth open. "We'll wait until noon when the men are in their sheds, and the road's empty of eyes, or night if we have to." Sarah wasn't relieved. She didn't know what she was. "I saw tracks," she said. "Old, maybe days, maybe more. A horse and a man, west to east." "Everybody's been everywhere in this county," Pa said, with a line between his brows held. He lifted the box, tested the weight the way one tests a sack of grain, and then, without, another word carried it up the short ladder into the hayloft. Sarah followed with the badge and the papers. In the loft, light fell through a crack in the boards and wrote a stripe on the floor. Mice lives chirped in the walls. Pa slid the box behind the stacked bales where the rafters made a shadow wide enough to swallow it. He heaped loose hay over the corner and then set down an old tarp, the kind of honest mess that draws the eye away from the righteous one. "Don't say a word yet," he told her, wiping his palms on his shirt. "Not to anyone who ate me. Not until we hand it to the law, and even then, keep it short." She nodded. The badge in her hand had a weight out of proportion to its metal. She drew up a bale's length of twine and threaded the badge onto it, then looped it around the strong box's handle and knotted it twice, half superstition, half a way of telling herself the man it had belonged to might ride with them, see it to where it wanted going. Back on the ground, she washed her hands at the pump until the water ran clean and the grit stopped singing in her palms. Mudfoot had already fallen asleep in the shade of the trough, legs cocked, ridiculous as always. Sarah stood over him and felt something fierce bloom gratitude, fear, the thrill of having touched a story with her hands and not just her ears. It all braided into a single thought. I have done something that can't be undone. The day didn't care. The windmill creaked, the horses stomped flies. Pa returned to his saddle all, as if leather might forgive being waiting on him. Sarah went into the kitchen and poured coffee she didn't want, just to hold a hot thing and set it down again. She scrubbed the skillet until it shone, rinsed jars for the afternoon, set beans to soak. Work is a rope you can hold when the river runs fast. She held it. Twice she stepped to the window and looked toward the road. Heat was already making a shimmer above it, a mirage that could turn a man to two and a horse to smoke. No one traveled. A raven coasted low and landed on the fence post with a hop, head cocked, bead eye melting the distance into a single plane. It made a sound like a cluck of disapproval, and then flew on. Bored with their small business dot near noon, Pa came to the kitchen door with his hat in his hand, and a look Sarah knew decision made, space left for objection he didn't expect. "We'll eat," he said. "Then hitch Annabelle to the wagon and take that thing in. The long way round by the cottonwoods. Less chance of meeting anybody. I'll sit up with the rifle. A man would have to be twice a fool to try us, but I've met men who've majored." In that, Sarah nodded. Her throat was dry again. She put bread and beans on the table and made herself chew. Pa ate like a man building a bridge with his teeth efficient, a little grim. When the plates were clean, he stood and stretched his back with a crackling sound. "Tell you something," he said, and his voice slanted like a story's. "When that bank got hit, I thought about what I'd do if I ever stumbled on a piece of what they took. It's a thing you allow yourself to think when you're young and poor and no one's looking. I told myself I'd be smart. I'd make it right. Then I told myself that was a lie I wanted to believe about me." He shrugged. "You don't know until the thing is in your hands. You brought it home. That's knowing." She didn't say that the thought about keeping any of it hadn't occurred to her until he spoke it. And now it sat in the room, small and relentless as a mosquito. She didn't slap at it. She let it hum and be nothing. "We'll take it in," she said. They rose from the table together. Through the open door, the yard lay bright and ordinary. The only shadow that moved was the one cast by the cottonwood near the pump, its leaves shivering in a breeze the skin couldn't feel. A dust cloud far off might have been the wind making a fuss of nothing, or it might have been a rider moving, slow, keeping himself between two thoughts like a man between doors. Sarah went to the barn to fetch the harness. The swallows scolded her again, old ladies nervous about their laundry. She climbed the ladder to the loft for one last look at the tarp and the intangible shape beneath it. She didn't lift the edge. She didn't need to. On her way back down, her boot toe caught a sliver of wood sticking from the jam fresh, pale against the older grain. She paused and touched the scar. It was where the latch met the frame, a place that took bruises honest. This bruise was new. Maybe Pa had thrown the door with more force than habit. Maybe the heat had swollen the wood. Maybe. She stepped into the light, blinked, and saw that the dust cloud she'd called nothing had resolved into a thin vertical line now, like smoke, or a man without a hat riding at a pace that wouldn't announce him. She squinted and then shook her head once. Distance made liars out of eyes. She whistled for Annabelle and told her hands to move. Harness traces the leather. That knows your story. Work is a rope. She held it, and the knot in the middle pulled tight. By late afternoon, the sun burned white and merciless over the Hensley farm. Heat shimmered across the flats, blurring the far fence lines until they looked like they might float away if you stared too long. Sarah had just finished leading Annabelle back to water after a long practice pull with the wagon. The horse tossed her head and snorted, grateful for shade, while Sarah unbuckled the sweaty leather traces. Her shirt clung to her back, her braid frayed to flyaways, but her mind was sharper than the heat. She kept thinking of the strong box in the loft, of the rusted lock, and the papers tucked inside. Every time she blinked, she saw Sheriff Alden's badge, bent and bloodied, waiting like a ghost for Justice Dot. She was about to call pay for supper when Annabelle jerked her head up. Ears pricked, nostrils flared. A warning ripple moved through the horse's muscles. Sarah straightened. Animals always knew first. That's when she saw him. A lone rider moved slow along the east fence line, just beyond the cottonwoods. He didn't call out, didn't wave. He simply stopped his horse where the fence sagged and leaned an elbow on the pommel like a man who had all the time in the world. Sarah's heart stuttered. She could tell from this distance he wasn't one of the neighbors. His hat brim was pulled low, shadowing most of his face, but when the wind lifted the dust just right, she caught a glint of a scar down his cheek and a pair of eyes that looked like storm clouds about to break. His horse was lean and travel-worn, the kind that didn't spook easy. He tipped his hat. "Evening, miss," he called, voice low and slow, like honey poured over gravel. Sarah tightened her grip on Annabelle's reins. "Evening," she answered, wary. She didn't step closer, nor did she back away. "Fine place you've got here," the man went on. "Sturdy fences. Crops look fair. Good hog, too. Big one. Pink fella with a notch ear, right? Every hair." On Sarah's arms lifted. He'd been watching. He'd seen Mudfoot. "Name's Clayton," he said. "I'm looking for something misplaced. Thought maybe your pig found it first." Sarah's stomach dropped. Clayton. She knew that name. Everyone in Dry Creek knew it, though folks said it quiet, in barrooms and back corners. He was the gunman of the Blackthorn gang, the one who could shoot the flame off a candle at 50 yards, the one who never missed. Rumor had it he was the reason Sheriff Alden hadn't come back. She forced her voice steady. "Don't know what you're talking about." Clayton's smile was thin, and it never reached his eyes. Funny thing about pigs. They've got a nose for what's buried. Gold, grain, trouble. Can't say which yours turned up, but I reckon it belongs to me. And mine. He shifted in the saddle, slow and easy, but Sarah noticed his hand resting near his revolver, not touching it. Just near, Annabelle blew out a sharp breath and sidestepped. Sarah laid a calming hand on her neck, though her own pulse was racing. "This is my family's farm," she said, words clipped clean. "You'd best ride on before Pa comes out with his shotgun." Clayton chuckled, low in his throat. Now, no need to get testy. I ain't here to make trouble. Just reckon something of ours might have surfaced. Best if it found its way back, quiet-like, safer for everyone." "Safe don't come from dealing with outlaws," Sarah shot back. The man's smile faded. His eyes sharpened. "Careful, miss. Words can bite worse than snakes." A long moment stretched between them, heavy as desert silence. The cicadas in the cottonwoods screamed like they wanted to drown it out. Then Clayton tugged his reins, turning his horse away. "I'll be back," he said over his shoulder. "That treasure don't stay hidden long. Pigs can't keep secrets, and neither can folks." Dust rose behind him as he rode off slow, deliberate, like a man not worried about being chased. Sarah stood rooted, fists clenched in Annabelle's mane until her knuckles ached. When the dust finally settled and the horizon went still again, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The farmyard looked the same. The barn slouched in the sun. The pump stood quiet. Mudfoot snored in the shade, but it wasn't the same. Clayton's shadow had fallen across it, and nothing would be ordinary again until he was gone for good. Sarah knew then that the strongbox wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a beacon, and the men who'd buried it were already circling back. That night, the Hensley farm did not sleep easy. Sarah lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to every creak of the house, every restless whicker from the barn, every snort from Mudfoot in his pen. The scarred man's words gnawed at her. "I'll be back." She pictured Clayton's storm-gray eyes fixed on her barn, on the hidden strongbox, on the sheriff's badge inside. She rose before dawn, long before Pa's first cough for coffee. She pulled on her boots and stepped into the chill air. The stars were fading, the horizon painted with the faintest streak of rose. She moved quiet across the yard, as if the ground itself might betray her. The barn loomed in shadow. Inside, the hayloft seemed to hold its breath around the hidden iron box. Sarah touched the tarp with her fingertips, just enough to feel the weight beneath. She didn't need to open it. She knew what was inside. Money that could buy her family. Freedom from drought and debt, or money that could bring ruin if Clayton's gang came for it. And there was the badge, bent and bloodied, whispering of a man who had died chasing justice. When Pa joined her in the kitchen, she was already pouring coffee. "We take it in today," she said. No hesitation. Pa studied her. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, then softened. He nodded. "Aye, we do it today." By noon, they had the wagon hitched, the strongbox wrapped in burlap beneath a load of feed sacks. Pa rode on the bench with the rifle across his lap. Sarah walked beside, hand on Annabelle's bridle. The sun burned high, and the road shimmered like liquid glass. Every dust cloud on the horizon made her throat tighten. They chose the long route, through the cottonwoods, just as Pa had planned. The wagon wheels bumped over ruts, the iron-shod hooves of Annabelle clopping steady. Sarah kept her eyes on the tree line, ears straining for the sound of hooves not their own. It was quiet, too quiet. No meadowlarks, no quail breaking from cover. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their tongues. Then came the snap of a twig. Clayton stepped out from the cottonwoods, his horse tied behind him, revolver loose in his hand. His scar caught the sunlight like a brand. Two more riders emerged farther down, both gaunt, both hard-eyed men who wore dust and cruelty like second skins. "Afternoon," Clayton drawled, as if greeting neighbors. "Reckon you've got something in that wagon belongs to us." Pa raised the rifle to his shoulder in one smooth motion. "You turn around," he said, voice flat. "Road's closed to the likes of you." Clayton smiled thin. "Now, I don't fancy spooking your young lady here, so I'll say it plain. That box carries our wages. We earned it. And we'll be talking it back." Sarah's heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She stepped forward before Pa could speak. "No, that money isn't yours. It was stolen from the people of Dry Creek. And that badge?" She spat the word like it was steel. "That badge proves you killed a good man to keep it. It's going back where it belongs." For the first time, Clayton's grin faltered. His eyes flickered. A shadow of recognition at the name Alden whispered in her words. "Careful, girl," he said softly. "You don't know the fire you're stoking." Pa cocked the rifle. "She knows enough." The standoff stretched taut. As wire, the outlaws' horses stamped, restless. The sun beat down, relentless. Then, like salvation, a second sound reached them, the rhythmic thunder of hooves, coming fast. From the west, a half-dozen riders burst into view, dust billowing. Behind, at their head rode Sheriff Cummings and his deputies, rifles raised, badges glinting in the sun. Clayton cursed, low and vicious. He fired first, a shot that split the air beside Sarah's ear. Pa's rifle barked in reply. The cottonwoods erupted in gunfire, echoes crashing through the wash. Horses screamed, outlaws shouted, deputies advanced in a hail of dust, and lead. Sarah dove behind the wagon, heart hammering. She clutched the burlap-wrapped strongbox tight against her chest, as if her arms alone could shield it from bullets. Mudfoot, hearing the commotion all the way from the yard, let out an outraged squeal in the distance, a sound so absurd that for a heartbeat Sarah almost laughed. When the smoke cleared, two of the outlaws lay face down in the dust. Clayton was gone, vanished back into the mesquite like a rattlesnake sliding into shadow. The deputies gave chase, but the sheriff pulled up short, eyes narrowing. He'll be back. Men like him always are. Sarah stood, trembling, dust clinging to her sweat-soaked skin. She lifted the strongbox onto the wagon bed and turned to the sheriff. "This is yours now. Sheriff Alden died for it. Don't let his death mean nothing." Cummings doffed his hat, solemn. He took the box, then the badge when she handed it over. He studied the bent star in his palm, voice low. "This will be remembered, Miss Hensley. You and your pa did right. Dry Creek owes you." By sundown, Sarah and Pa were back on the farm. The barn stood as they'd left it. Mudfoot trotted up, grunting indignantly at being ignored all day, his snout smeared with dirt from some new digging. Sarah crouched to scratch behind his ear, her smile weary but true. "Guess you weren't such a nuisance after all," she whispered. The sky flared orange and violet as the day bled into night. The danger wasn't gone. Clayton was still out there, his threat coiled tight, but something had shifted. Sarah had faced down an outlaw, carried justice in her arms, and returned it to where it belonged.